Hi, this is Miss Meloy, the Lindbergh librarian. We are continuing to read I Survived. I Survived the Sinking of the Titanic, 1912. This is the fourth recording, so that I've read the first three sections, and this is the fourth. Okay, let's get to it. Chapter 5. At dinner last night, Aunt Daisy raised her glass. To George! No trouble for one entire day. They clinked their glasses together just as an old man stopped by their table. Mrs. Key, the man said to Aunt Daisy, I've been meaning to say hello. Mr. Steed, Aunt Daisy said, what a pleasure. This is George, my nephew, and Phoebe, my niece. Mr. Steed nodded hello. So, Aunt Daisy said, what brings you on this magnificent ship? Oh, I couldn't miss it, he said. I think all of society's on this ship. I hear there's even an Egyptian princess aboard. Really? Aunt Daisy said, I have not met her yet. Well, none of us have. She's traveling in the first class baggage room. Excuse me? The princess is more than 2,500 years old. George's ears perked up. I'm not sure I understand, Miss Daisy said. She's a mummy, Mr. Steed said. A mummy, Phoebe gasped. That's right, Mr. Steed said, from a tomb near Thebes. I understand that she belonged to a man named Mr. Burroughs. People are saying he sold the coffin to the British Museum. Then he packed the princess herself in a wooden crate. Apparently, he's bringing her back for his collection. Some say it's bad luck to take a mummy from its tomb. I'm glad I'm not the superstitious type, Aunt Daisy said. Mr. Steed chuckled. In any case, nothing can harm this ship, not even the curse of a mummy. Mr. Steed tipped his hat and said goodbye. Mr. Steed is a very famous writer in England, Aunt Daisy said. You never know who you'll meet on the Titanic. And then it hit George, the best idea ever. That mummy, he had to see it. Maybe this day wasn't so boring after all. Chapter 6. George didn't tell Phoebe or Aunt Daisy about his plan. He figured he'd head down to first-class baggage after they went to sleep. He'd find Mr. Burroughs' crate, pry it open, and take a quick peek at the mummy. He'd be back in bed and snoring way before anybody knew he was gone. It was almost 11:15 when Phoebe finally was asleep and the light was out under Aunt Daisy's door. George crept out of his bed. He quickly got dressed, put his knife in his pocket. He'd need it for prying off the lid of the crate. And who knew? Maybe there was a live cobra in that box, too. George could hope, couldn't he? George opened the door and peeked into the hallway. He wanted to avoid Henry, who seemed to have eyes in the back of his bright orange head. He wouldn't like George creeping around so late at night. But the hallway was quiet. There was no noise at all except for the quiet hum of the engines rising up from the bottom of the ship. George loved that noise. It made him think of crickets in the woods at night. In fact, being out here all by himself reminded him of the nights at home when he sneaked out into the woods while Papa and Phoebe were asleep. He'd head out when his mind was filled with restless thought about why Papa was always mad at him, or why he didn't try harder in school, and of course Mama. Almost 3 years had passed since she died. George tried not to think of her too much, but sometimes when he closed his eyes, he remembered her smile, or her smell when she hugged him, like fresh grass and sweet flowers, and that song she'd sing to wake George up in the morning. Awake, awake, it's now daybreak, and don't forget your dreams. Thinking about Mama was like standing close to a fire, warm at first, but if you get too close, it hurt too much. Much better to stay clear of those thoughts. Nothing cleared George's mind quicker than being in the woods. He never stayed out there for more than an hour or two, except for that night back in October. George was heading back towards home when he heard a terrible sound. It was like a girl screaming. He turned around, and in the dark, he saw two glowering yellow eyes. Some old-timers said they were Black Panthers in the woods, but George never believed it. But as yellow eyes got closer, George could see the outline of a huge cat with glistening fangs. George told himself not to run. He knew he could never outrun that panther. But he couldn't help it. He ran as fast as he could. Branches cut his face, and he didn't slow down. Any second, that panther would leap up and tackle him, and the claws would tear him apart. George could feel the cat right behind him. He could smell his breath like rotting meat. George grabbed a fallen branch. He turned and waved it in front of him. The panther lunged and grabbed the branch in its jaws. George let go of the stick and scrambled up the tree, climbing as high as he could. The cat dropped the branch and came after him, like a shadow with glowing eyes. George pulled out his knife. He waited until the cat's front paws were on the small bench below him, and then, with all of his might, he chopped at the branch and his knife. Crack! The branch broke free. The giant cat tumbled through the air, screaming and crashing through the branches, and then hit the ground with a thud. And there was silence. For next time,